Excellent. Just before we get started, those of you online, if you could just put into the chat in 2 or 3 words what you're looking for funding for, and those of you in the room, can you quickly tell me in a couple of words what it is that you're looking for funding for? We'll just go around the room really quickly. If there's something specific, is there?
Infrastructure for a sporting club.
Okay, and is that in Coffs? Yes. Yep.
We're a community garden, so we're looking to do infrastructure and maybe parks and things like that for above ground garden beds.
Okay.
Looking towards putting more resources in place for seniors and other people in that community.
Okay. Other people?
Kerry, I work in sports development councils, so
yep.
we've got no shortage of sporting projects that we're seeking something.
Okay, good.
Just online, we've got just want to hear your advice in general. Baseball Association support.
Yep.
Community radio station 104.1 and digital business plan writing.
Okay. Okay, great. Lots of sporting clubs represented today, which is good. And this first slide is going to be really relevant to you. Now, you've probably seen a lot of these points already. Whenever anybody comes to me and tells me that they want to write a grant or they want some funding money, sorry, I'm just going to show this my face so I can put my timer on. The first thing I tell them is, have you explored different ways to make money? Because grant writing or grants are never a sustainable way to operate anything. Now, if you're looking for infrastructure, that's great, but you also need to think about your maintenance plan and how will you be maintaining your grants. Oh, I can see it there. That's good. Okay, so someone's got it. That's good. For those of you online, there's things going on everywhere. So I'm just working out how I orient myself. So I'm not going to go into these in great depth. However, if you do end up doing the Evolve course, you'll learn a lot more about them. So fundraising is obviously a good way to make money. Has anyone been involved in fundraising? Raffle ticket selling, etc. Yep. Philanthropy and donations. So that's a way that you can actually garnish quite a lot of money. And you might look at things like dollar for dollar investment. So maybe you have a certain amount of money in your kitty, a philanthropist or a different type of government funding body might be able to match you dollar for dollar. Sponsorship is another way. And I would think with infrastructure projects, having sponsorship, and we're actually at Coffs Harbour today at the stadium, and I can see sponsors banners all around the stadium. So sponsorship's a great way to generate revenue. In my deep dark past, I was actually a media buyer, so I got to carve up hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy advertising space that, in my view, annoyed people. But let's face it, in the community world, advertising, if you have a commodity to sell, it can make money. Even in the community garden, sponsorship is a really good thing for you to be looking at. Crowdfunding is a way that has increasingly great impact in raising money. Investment, maybe you can have something like a public-private investment happening. Commercial loans. If a loan is something that you're looking for and you're working with a not-for-profit organisation, I thoroughly recommend you check out SIFA. It's SIFA, it's the Social Investment Fund Australia. They have low interest rate loans and capacity development for community projects and not-for-profits. And then self-generated revenue. So 10 years ago, social enterprise was all the rage in Australia. And I must say in Australia, we don't get social enterprise really, but fundamentally what it is trading for a social purpose. So you'll see things like like Jamie Oliver's cafe, for example, that was a social enterprise cafe. So its purpose was to train people in the hospitality industry and generate enough money to ideally make a profit. And as we saw, they went bankrupt, so they probably didn't. And then government funding's really little down the bottom. So whenever I teach people about government funding, I wrote my first grant probably about 20 years ago now, But I was actually involved in fundraising from an early teenager because I was raising money for the gymnastics club that I was part of. And I used to go and knock on doors all around the neighbourhood selling raffle tickets. They probably heard my bike coming and went, oh, here she comes again. What do they need this time? But that experience was really good for me as a teenager, not only in terms of communication, but also learning that my community wants to support the activities that I'm involved in as a human being and that are happening for other kids in the region. The other thing I learned at that part is that people will support projects that they trust. People will support people that they trust. I can see that you're nodding in the room, so you must have experienced that to some point. Now, my question for you is, the projects that you're running, is there a face? Is there a human being or a group that represents that project that people can easily recognise? Yeah. So maybe that's something that you can work on as well, which is probably a separate topic about PR, etc. But it's really important because people buy stories. They engage in stories. They want to say, hey, I supported the motorcycle club to do this because they do ABC. They're not just going to throw money at things that they don't believe in. So the first part is finding the funding source. Now, there's lots of different ways to go about finding where you can actually apply for grants. Google's a really good friend with grants, of course. What you can see here, I've actually made 10 blog posts for you and they're all on my website at the moment. By Wednesday, it will be an ebook, but it's not today. So if you just write down evolvenetwork.com.au, so for those of you online, it's evolvenetwork.com.au and click on blog. And on the blog, you can see all of these posts. So it will give you the direct links to all of the places you can go to get grants. On the Regional Development Australia Mid-North Coast site, there's a grant portal there, and that looks at grants for business as well as community groups. So there's a list there. That one is rdamnc.org.au. Again, all these links are in the blog posts for you, so you can go and access those. Our community is another place to go and get grants. And then the government has its own sites as well. So business.gov.au is a place where you can get lots of information about grants, and you'll find a lot of the infrastructure projects are in there. So what you do with that site is you register for it and it emails you all of the relevant opportunities as they come through. So you can stay up to date with them and work out what you're needing. But there's other ways to find funding sources. And one is to subscribe to your local MP's newsletter. So if you're in Coffs, subscribing to Gurmish's newsletter or Pat Conahan's newsletter, and they will tell you about grants that come through. You really want to make sure, and round about slide 9, I'm going to talk about the people that are supporting you in the grants. You really want to make sure that your MPs know about your project because they can throw their support behind it, and that really helps too. Have any of you done that already? Gardens up and running?
Kerry, we also have a subscription to Grants Guru on council's
Oh,
website.
great, Heather, thank you. And how do people access that?
If they go onto council's website under grants, there's a login there, and
Yeah.
council pays a subscription to that.
Okay.
That's a free resource.
Thank you.
Grants Guru.
Yeah. So Grants Guru gets both commercial and community grants from all over the country and puts them together. You can also go to another site called Pro Bono, and Pro Bono will give you lists of philanthropic grants. So they can be kind of different to government-oriented grants in that their outcomes may be a little bit different. The reporting might be a bit different. So generally with government grants, you have a very distinct set of guidelines that you have to achieve and levels of compliance that you must meet before you can apply for the grant. Whereas philanthropic grants can sometimes be a little bit more flexible. And I'll give you an example of that. So when I was working in Barraville about a decade ago, one of the entities I was working with had attracted the Fairfax Foundation to be interested in supporting the community. So we didn't know what the project was at that stage, but the Fairfax family flew their private jet up to Barraville, wherever they landed, I don't know, Coffs probably, and did a tour around Barraville and then decided that they would invest $1 million in that community. So the philanthropic funding works in a very different way. And if you imagine being essentially a salesperson, so if you've got a really good pitch, a really good story that people can engage in, And the story of that community is, I guess, from a funding perspective, very investable for a funding body. There's lots of opportunities. So again, if you go to that blog post, there's a lot of links, and I'll add yours in, Heather, as well to the blog post to make sure people can get it. So part 2 is get your game face on, or prepare yourself to write the grant. Now, I'm not even going to pretend that grant writing is not a stressful activity, because it actually is. Has anybody ever actually written a very large tender and found that to be true? Yeah. So I think we should stop kidding ourselves about grant writing being easy and actually prepare. So if you have young children in your house or teenagers, you need to actually make sure that they are aware that you're doing something that requires focus, that doesn't involve them, which is very difficult, as we all know with teenagers. I like to, when I'm working on a grant process, to just find a way that I can have full days in a quiet room, without email, without the telephone, without social media, so that I couldn't just focus in on it. And the reason that you need that is because each grant carries its own language. It carries its own language because the funding body is looking for something specific to address. Now, at the moment, I'm assisting to write a grant, which is so nice that I'm not in charge of it, because it's a very big grant, and it's about employment in our region. So in order to do that, we need to really work out what's the lingo with employment at the moment, because if you have, when you write your grant application, it needs to be on point with what is current in the language. So skill shortage, for example, is current language, whereas years ago we might have talked about employment gaps. Skill shortage, labour market shortages, youth unemployment is a really important thing that people are talking about. Now, where you find this lingo, and you may not like me for recommending this, but it's the case, you listen to as much radio as you can of all genres. So when I'm writing a grant application, I listen to Alan Jones, I listen to Star FM, I listen to the ABC, because I want to get a broad spectrum of opinions and the way that people are talking, the words that they're using, the opinions that they have. And then I want to weave that into the grant application. Now, that may seem a little bit complicated, but if you're focused entirely on this particular application, it's like you can make it akin to visiting a foreign country, if you like. So you need to learn the language in order to be going there. So you want to use the words that are on trend. You want to somehow weave in the opinions that are on trend without selling yourself out, of course. When that's in your application, the people that are assessing it can go through it and they can say, yeah, this is really meeting the needs that we have at this current time. So that will really help you. Also, self-care, as I was mentioning before, is really important during grants. So if you like to munch on chips, you might check out a company called eRaw. So eRaw talks about things like healthy eating in the workplace. And Linda, who runs eRaw, will tell you, I'm very sure to make sure there's a bowl of fruit on your desk. Just little things like that will keep you well. Make sure that you're exercising and getting out during the time. Some of the bigger grant applications that I've written can take 2 weeks or more to be writing them, and they're really intensive. So like with your infrastructure project that you write, your grants will be big ones. Maybe a little bit less with a community garden, but still they can be very intensive projects. So the blog post goes on about that a little bit more, so I won't continue. Now, your funding toolkit. Who has ever written a grant application only to discover that they did not have all of the information they needed about the organisation? Yeah. Do you know what? I've just done that today as well. I wrote an application many years ago that was actually successful for $4.5 million. And with 30 seconds to go in the grant application, we realised that we had not yet submitted the business registration certificate. And I had somebody in a childcare centre going and taking a photograph of the business registration certificate on the wall in the frame, emailing it to me and pinging it up onto the website. Now, that was nerve-wracking, and I did not need that, and I don't need to go there again. So now I share this information with everybody, and It's do as I say, not as I do. These are the things that you need to have as a bare minimum ready for your application. So you need to have that historic information about your organisation or your project, because that's the story that people will buy into. People want to know, why should I support this? Where did it come from? Who came up with the idea? That's very engaging information. You'll need to have some pictures and videos about the organisation too. You can't always submit those, but sometimes you can. Just as a segue, I'll give you an example. I once wrote a grant for the Kevin Rudd's binge drinking strategy, and I put in the application and I knew it was going to be highly competitive because it was a national grant. So I went to my local post office and I found a postcard that said I got drunk in Nambucca Heads. And if you think that's unique to Nambucca Heads, I can assure you it's not, because you can probably get bumper stickers for that anywhere. I wrote on the back of it, please find our application attached. As you can see, it's endemic in the region, or something to that note. But I guarantee you, when those funding bodies opened it up, I had snuck in, luckily, this extra thing that looked like a with comp slip, but it was actually a very, very poignant point. And they gave us $250,000 as a reward to that. And I still think it was the postcard above the funding application that got it. So pictures and videos about your organisations, because it's true, they do paint 1,000 words. You will need evidence about your project. So you know it's great, you know it's going to be great, but how do you prove that to anybody else? Now, let's say with your community garden, you can go many different ways with evidence. So you could look at social inclusion's a little bit 2010, but you might say it means the same thing but different language, reducing isolation. So, of course, COVID has increased isolation in our community. So you could be talking about COVID-friendly ways for people to connect and build connections. You might also be talking about healthy eating, or you might also be talking about activity, staying fit for seniors. So there's lots of different angles that you can draw out. And it's great because the more angles you can draw out of your application, like with your infrastructure project, it might be, maybe you've got a juniors team. So it could be, you could even draw it as far as employability skills for young people, because they're learning communication, how to get along, skill sets, routine, turning up on time, all of those things. Soft skills, incidentally, are very fundable things at the moment, because no one can. So soft skills are employability skills, and they're things like writing a sentence, turning up on time, dressing for work, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, sporting clubs are really poised well to be building soft skills, particularly among young people. So look at those type of grant applications, but you need evidence to prove it. So if we were looking, for example, for a body of evidence about needing a grant to help young people into work, you'd be looking at employment statistics, you'd be looking at health statistics, you'd be looking at things like the Professor Tony Vinson report's a bit out of date now, unfortunately, but that has the type of data that indicates disadvantage. On the Regional Development Australia website, there's actually a free subscription to REMplan that you can pick up. So if you need simple census data that tells you things like how many people live in the region, what's their age group, what's their income, etc., that's all there. But there's also information on businesses, which is there too. If you ever need information on employment, Department of Employment, sorry, the department's name's changed. I think it's the Department of Employment, Small and Family Business. And skills is in there somewhere too. Anyway, Google Employment Commonwealth and it'll bring it up for you. That has a lot of information on employment and employment data. You will need to have as a minimum your business registration certificate, your ABN, and if you have a company number, your ACN. You'll also need things like, if you have a permit to fundraise, you'll need that license too. You'll need your financials, and not just 1 year. If you haven't had your financials audited, or if they're not up to date, make sure you go and do that before you even start applying for grants, because otherwise it's going to be impossible. So really big grants will ask you for a 3-year audited financial statement, and you can hand in to them essentially 3 years worth of audits. You'll need your business plan, and if you're staying this afternoon, or you can check it out online later, we'll talk about a very painless 1-page business plan as opposed to the old 70-page documents that used to be the thing to do. you'll need quotes for the work. So whatever it is that you're applying for funding for, you're going to need some kind of scope. Now that can be really difficult, as you know, if you've put in a grant for an infrastructure project, getting those quotes together and getting the scope together and even getting to DA stage can cost you upwards of $100,000. So that there's not a lot of grants around for that pre-work, which personally I don't think is that sensible, and hopefully that will change at some point, but at this point it hasn't. So if you can get perhaps a fundraising campaign to raise the funds to get to DA stage, or I mean, obviously in council it's a lot easier to get to that stage. Maybe that's somewhere where you need to look for partnerships with either the designers, developers, council, within the bounds of ethics. Team and organisational structure is also something that you need. So one of the grants we're applying for at the moment, we have to identify team members that don't actually exist in our team at this point in time, which is a really interesting ask from the government. However, they want to know that we have the right people on deck, and fair enough, and we do, which is good. All right, so part 4 is finding that supporting data. And I just mentioned some sources before, so I won't go into that too much. But again, this blog post has information for you. Now, you don't need to be an economist or a statistician to be able to work out the data. It is available for you in lots of places. And I have this secret fantasy that one day a website will exist for each local government area with data that people can just pull out and put it into the application, so we don't all have to keep doing it individually. But let's see, maybe I'll do that in another lifetime when I work out cloning. Part 5 is your grant concept. Now I've got a few more notes on that. Sometimes people think when you get a grant application, it's as easy as opening it up and filling out the criteria. Well, I don't believe a really well-written grant is that easy. I think the best way to start is to write the actual funding concept. And you do that for a couple of reasons. The first is it gets the story straight in your mind. But the second reason is it's easier to engage partners that way, because you're already quite across what it is that you're doing. So this is a template, again, it's in the blog post, that you can use to be able to work out what your funding concept is. Now, when I write a grant, particularly large ones, what I do is I will write out my funding concept. It's usually on about 3/4 of an A4 page. And if it requires any kind of drawings or anything like that to go with it, I'll send those too. But that's then something that I can send around potential funding partners to say, this is what we're going to do. And then they can just pull lines out of it for letters of support as well. So it takes all of the pain out of it. I can tell you at my desk, I get asked for a lot of letters of support, and it can be really arduous to have to draw out, what do you want to do? Because you'd be surprised how often people don't know what they want to do with a grant. And for me to sit there and have to work out what they want so that I can write a letter of support that I'm happy with, let's just say sometimes I just won't write it because I don't have the time to do that. So the more you can tell people about what to expect, what you're going to do, who your organisation is in this funding concept and statement, the more likely you are to get the engagement that you want to have. And again, remember in the beginning I mentioned profile. There's some people that I will get requests from letters of support from. I know the human, I've seen them deliver. I know they do great work in the community because they've told me and they've made it easy for me to follow them. So when they ask for a letter of support, it takes me 5 to 6 minutes to write it. Out the door, everybody's happy. That's the position that you want to find yourself in. Incidentally, that's where social media can be a really good friend for you as well. So if you're not, is everybody using social media for their projects? Yeah, that's great. So you want to make sure that key people in your region are following your social media so that it's popping up in their feed and they can stay in tune with it. I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to put some information down on this while I grab a drink of water. And same for you online. So you can just put down a couple of ideas about it. Like literally, I'll give you 90 seconds to do it and then we can keep moving. Oh, thanks, Heather. Thank you. going to ask a brave person to read theirs out too. Okay, now I know I haven't given you very long, but does anyone have any part of that they'd like to quickly read out? Does everything in that statement make sense? Yeah, that's the main thing, that it makes sense. Now, what this demonstrates is the importance of your elevator pitch, because you never know who you're going to run into and when. So last year I did a lot of travel for my job, and I realized that quite often politicians will be on the plane. So I knew that I needed to have the right pitch ready to go right now about what it is that I want to say. And for those of you that are moving around community and coming to networking events like this, you literally never know who could be in the room, and you don't want to stumble across your words. The reason that I really wanted you to write something is that so it embeds in your mind how important this activity is. I want you to be able to go, imagine if you went into Gomesh's office and said, Gomesh, we really want to do this, and this is why, and this is the win that you'll get and the win that our community will get. Has anyone done that yet? All right, Gomesh, I hope you're watching, because it sounds like you've got some projects in the way. Incidentally, when I was teaching grant writing down in Taree a while ago, we did have an MP drop in and visit, and several of those projects did get funding, and they were all able to present their elevator pitch very quickly. So practice that, and practice it with each other, because this is really important that you get that. Okay, so the next bit, can you believe we're up to part 6 before we even got to writing the application? And I bet you thought that you were going to come today to actually just learn how to write it on paper. The writing is just about the least important part, but there are some parts you need to know about writing. Please don't open the application and start writing before you read the criteria, because you might find that you're ineligible to apply. And it could be a really simple shift. Maybe you need to have a different lead agency or organisation to write the application, or at least be the person who's holding the funding body, the funding money for you. So when you're writing an application, read the criteria to start with. If it looks like you're applicable or that you can apply for this particular project, now's the time to really start digging into it. I always start with the criteria first. So large applications, and quite often these days small ones as well, will have a certain set of criteria. Now, when you go to the criteria, you'll be very pleased that you'd been listening to Alan Jones and the likes, because you'll see language that you heard on those radio stations. And if you didn't, don't curse me, because it's still useful to do it. So read the criteria, and I suggest that people just freeform write to start with. So write whatever comes into your mind when you start, and don't be judgmental about it. Just enable yourself to write. Then once you've got your first draft together, you'll need to start looking at your character count or your word count. So a lot of these applications now, in fact, most of them, you'll use Smarty Grants or something like that online. Always write your grant application in Microsoft Word or whatever Word package you use. The reason you want to do that is because in the future, when you apply for other grants, you'll be able to copy and paste a lot of that information. And nobody wants to waste time, particularly on grant writing. So cheat wherever you can with it, and don't do the same thing twice. So write it in a Word document. A really quick way to do it is register for Smarty Grants or whatever site you're using. Go and get all of the criteria that you're going to need to fill in, copy it into Microsoft Word, and then you can start filling in the criteria. I've lost an application in Smarty Grants before without having done the Word version, and it's really annoying to have to write it twice. Those systems do crash sometimes, so all the more reason to put it in Word. So you've got your freeform version written. You might even want to write the freeform version in dot points so that you can fill them out later. It depends how your mind works, really. Another technique that I use is get a really big bit of paper. You can just get that from a supermarket or somewhere and mind map all of the different facets of the grant so that then I can fill those in later and match them into criteria. There's lots of different ways you can do it, but the main thing is getting all of the ideas out to start with. If you're working with a committee or a broader group of stakeholders, you want to do that early brainstorming with them so that any left of centre ideas that people don't understand can be expressed at that point. Otherwise, it's quite easy to end up writing the wrong idea for the grant. So that's really important to do. Now you want to hone in your points, make sure your character count or your word count matches, and keep reading that criteria question again and again and again. If you need to, the grant guidelines will always tell you what they mean by each of the questions. So read that as well to make sure that it's really clear in your mind what it means. And then just fill out the technical details, and it's good to have a grant writing buddy to be able to check the information, because you might have some typos or spelling mistakes, particularly if you're completely immersed in it. But set that up before you even go into the process, so you're not dumping it onto somebody's desk at the very last minute, because that can be quite annoying too. So that's writing the grant application. Now there's a few dangers and pitfalls that I'd like to alert you to at this point, and Heather alluded to it early on. One of them is, I call it money grabbing. And I always remember somebody in community once saying, I'm just going to keep applying for grants until there's no more grants to apply for. And that strategy doesn't actually work, because after a while, the funding bodies will see all of the sponsor logos or all of the whatever, and they'll just say, these people are just, continually throwing money without a sustainable plan, because grants are never a sustainable way to run a business. So if you're requiring constant grant funding to be able to operate, you need to look at the business model a little bit more seriously to get there. So even community gardens, you could be selling seedlings, selling produce, lots of, yeah. So that within that pitfall is mission drift. So I've seen, and I've actually experienced it. So I worked in essentially a neighbourhood centre, and we didn't have any concurrent funding. So we had to apply for lots of different grants so that we could exist. And what that ended up meaning for me was that what was once a centre to just provide information and family support then became something that did markets, and then it did enterprise projects, and then it did all of these things. So as the CEO, I was going in so many different directions just so we could exist through all of these very different grants. It was really exhausting, and we, in a way, lost the core purpose of the business. So any kind of social business is most potent when it's focusing really closely on what it is that its purpose is. What is it that it does? And it's the same for sporting groups, obviously, as well. What is it that you do? What is the reason that you're actually there? So you want to avoid this mission drift by, while you can hone your grant to go in many different directions, you want to make sure that it's still going in the direction that meets the core purpose of the business. Another danger is having too many little grants, because believe it or not, there's as much administration in a $5,000 grant as there is a $100,000 grant. It's a very strange phenomenon, but it still requires reporting. It still requires networking. And if you've got 25 $5,000 grants sitting in your coffers, you're going to get really tired of reporting. It's something that I cannot understand from a bureaucratic level, why there can't be more consistent reporting processes. But most likely, even if you're reporting to the same level of government, each different department and each different grant will have very different ways to report. A politician did tell me that that's changing at some point, so I eagerly await that. There are a couple of the pitfalls. There's a lot more online. Now, raising awareness is where we started, and I want to make sure that you're really across this as well. So once you've written the grant and submitted it, it doesn't stop there. What I see is a lot of people go, phew, that's in, that's great. Now I'll go and go about my business. The best and most successful grants then go on to advocate and lobby, connect, network, get media together so that you can really be building that case for what it is that you've got in the pipeline. So a grant that I partnered with a few years ago that was $1.2 million for a community project. That was successful not only because it was a good application that was timely and supported by community, it was also successful because somebody got on a plane and went and sat with the minister that was in charge of that grant and told them all about the application. So that is not an underhanded way to be able to lobby and advocate for your community. It's a smart way to be doing it. So you want to be networking with your MPs. If it's a massive grant, you want to make sure the relevant minister knows about it at both state and Commonwealth level. You want to know that your councillors are involved in it, that the council departments understand what it is that you're doing. And you raise that profile not only by knocking on doors and saying, hey, can I actually come and meet you about this? There's nothing, I mean, COVID's obviously prevented a lot of face-to-face meetings, but they're starting to increase again now. You will be surprised who will sit down and meet with you, particularly when you've got a well-honed elevator pitch and you can tell them very quickly what it is that you want. Your grant will stand out if you're well connected, if you can articulate it simply, if you're very in tune with how it will benefit the community, and if you just make the whole process simple and easy to understand. So knock on the MP's doors, knock on your council doors, sorry, council staff. But from a council point of view, is that something that you would appreciate? Yeah. And does it happen often? So if somebody wanted to tell you about what they want to apply for, how would they go about doing that?
Just come and make an appointment with either myself or sporting as well.
Yep.
And if we can't help you, we'll put you in touch with somebody who can.
Thanks, Heather. So there's people in the community that know lots of people from marketing contexts. They're called market mavens, I guess. But your council people are people that are well connected in the community and can send you and want to send you to the right place. So make sure you're connected. Connect with the media. Tell the media what it is that you're doing. Media can be great once they know and understand what it is that you're trying to do. Then they might connect with you on a story that's relevant to that particular thing when and if it comes up. So maybe it's gardening week and they'll say, oh, you know, people might say, oh, let's go and interview the local gardening club and talk about the community garden, because she knows. Does she know you exist yet? Does she know that you exist? Yeah. Brilliant. That's good. And Fee's a great journo too. So make sure she knows about what's going on. Again, I know I said this a minute ago, but again, I want to embed this. You will be surprised how many people will let you through their door and listen to your story if you ask. And who knows, they might want to contribute in some way as well. The next bit is your stakeholders matter. So you would be surprised how often I've been asked to partner in a funding application of some kind, and then I never ever hear about it again. That is really poor stakeholder management. And they're the kind of grants that probably won't support in the future. Similarly, grants can happen and you think you're going to be part of the partnership, but all of a sudden you're not part of the partnership anymore and you're seeing it delivered. And again, you can imagine, well, I probably don't want to support that into the future. So if you have, when I say stakeholders, what I mean are the people in your actual organisation or your sporting club or your group, your committee or your governance structure, then the clients that are using it too. So there's an experience that I had once that really embedded with me. So we were running a program for young mums, and the program came from the most ghastly titled funding, which was helping young people at risk. And I quite detest language like that because I think it's quite offensive. Nevertheless, that's where the money came from. Anyway, one of the participants, who was most certainly not a young person at risk, but she was a young mum, saw my funding report and was deeply offended for being referred to as a young person at risk. And that just made me realize at that time how important it would have been to earlier have a conversation with her as one of the stakeholders to say, look, I don't think you're at risk, blah, 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 but this is where the money's coming from to run the program. So let's just go there. So that those conversations are really important to have. And the people who are involved in the projects have such, important information to give to how they're constructed. And again, particularly with more socially inclined projects, you really want to get that information from your user groups. So your stakeholders matter, keep them informed. Granted, I'm sure that a lot of you, like me, get too many newsletters in your inbox and they're very easy to ignore. So find out how your stakeholders want to be communicated with. Do they want a quarterly or an annual meeting? Do they want a quarterly newsletter? Do they want to just check you out on social media? So they want you to buy them a coffee every now and then. Whatever it is, people will have different needs, but you need to keep them engaged. And if you say you're going to do something, obviously you do it. Now, the last one's about following through. So can you believe I've actually seen people get grants and then not deliver them? And that is very frustrating too. They might be half delivered and then something happened, or they just couldn't really be bothered to do it. Can you imagine a funding body giving them money again? No, it doesn't happen. So I've worked on grants before where we've got to a certain point and realised actually this is not the solution that we needed because it might have changed over time. So what I did was I picked up the phone and talked to the funding body and said, could we actually make this change? So I didn't present them only with a problem. I presented them with a problem and the solution I'd like to implement. And it was never, ever a problem for them because I kept them informed and kept them in the loop about it. So following through also means simple thanks, which, thank you is such a rare thing in this world. I don't know why, but acknowledgement of people putting effort into supporting you to actually do these things and saying, send a snail mail card. They're, I don't know, the new thing, even send a socially enterprise produced snail mail card, and that's even better. There's lots of different ways that you can keep people engaged, but following through in terms of both your delivery and saying thanks is really important. So that one is actually the last slide, which gives us time for a bit of question. I'm not sure how we're going for time. 4 minutes to go. I like to try and stay punctual. That's good. I'll just tell you a little bit about this program. So it's delivered across 7 different units. So they're things like finance, marketing, business planning, grant writing, all the things that not-for-profit organisations need. It's mostly self-guided learning, but it has a monthly webinar to go with it as well. So that's where you can get that one-to-one support from me. So that's basically it. Now over to all of you for questions. Does anybody have any questions? That was a speed session. I can deliver the same one over 6 hours, so you can imagine. That's why I wrote the blogs for you, because I wanted you to get those links and further information. Any questions? Yeah.
Just a question about, you've quoted a lot of sources, networks, websites, etc. Where do we actually get that information? Is it through your...
Go to my, on the website and click on blog. And all of those posts have got the individual links. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Anybody else?
I'm sort of new to this and done a couple of grants myself recently. The way I see, I'm starting to think the best way to do this is to have several projects and quotes organised and business plans and scope of works all organised first.
Yes.
And then find a grant that suits them.
You've got it. Yeah. Yeah, because they'll pop up. And quite often the turnaround time is, the one I'm working on at the moment had a turnaround time of 2.5 weeks. It's ridiculously short, but generally they're about 6 weeks turnaround. And if you've got all that prepared, it's definitely the way to go. Yeah. Anybody else? Anyone online have any questions? I can see there's 2 things in the chat, but they might be old. Good. All right then. Well, I'm not going anywhere for the next little while. So if you have any questions, please ask. And those of you who are online, that's my email address. So if you'd like to ask any questions that way, please do. Thank you so much, everybody.